this is Dan with Orbital Guitars, and welcome back to part 3 of this Telecaster type guitar build. Part 2 ended where I just put all of the stain onto the body, and you can see here I've already drilled one hole that's going to be for the ground wire to the bridge, and what you're seeing here is me drilling the 4 holes for the screws that will attach the bridge to the body. Once those are done, I'm going to start drilling the holes for the strings to go through the body. Now, unfortunately, my drill press doesn't have the reach to get to these holes, so I have to do these by hand. People tell you not to do these by hand, and that's for good reason. It's very difficult to have them all line up properly on both the front and back of the body, but one trick you can use is to only drill halfway through from the front, then carefully line up where those holes would need to be on the back, and then drill halfway through from the back. And if you've done it properly, then all of the holes will line up in the middle, and they'll all be properly aligned on both the front and back of the body. You can see here, even though it's time-lapsed, I'm making a point of drilling fairly slowly and making sure that the drill bit doesn't suddenly catch when it hits the other part of the hole from the front of the body. And because this video is a little bit scattered all over the place, since everything that still needs to be done is a little bit scattered all over the place, the next thing I'm going to do is drill the holes on the back of the neck so that it can be bolted to the body. And of course, up until this point, I've been putting off fretwork, so that's what I get to do now. I'm going to start by just rounding over the ends of the frets. I'm not going to go into too much detail on fretwork in this video. I've gone into detail on it on other videos, and there are several other channels that have done exhaustive tutorials on fretwork, so it just seems like beating a dead horse at this point to ramble on about it yet again. Then with the ends of the frets rounded, I'm going to begin leveling. So at this point I will have already checked all of them with the fret rocker, and now I'm going to begin leveling them using a leveling beam. This one's got some 220 grit sandpaper on it. Not using much pressure here, just letting the weight of the leveling beam and my arm do most of the work as I slide it back and forth. Then after a little while, I'm going to go back in with the fret rocker and see if there are any high spots or low spots. Looks like I found a few, so it's back to the leveling beam. Then with all the frets level, I'm going to tape off the fretboard to protect it, and then start crowning using a crowning file. This is where I normally talk about how I'm working down the tops of the frets until there's only a thin line of a Sharpie mark left on top of the fret, but the angle of the light makes that almost impossible to see here, so you're just going to have to believe me. And once I'm down to that very thin line, I'm going to start the process of rounding over the tops of the fret just by scrubbing some 320 grit sandpaper over the tops of all the frets. And then after a lot of tedious sanding to get these frets as smooth as I can, then I'm going to go on to a buffing wheel, or a small buffing wheel that I've got for a Dremel, and start polishing the frets. This red wheel here is the medium grit, and I'll follow that up with the green fine grit polishing wheel. You can already see the frets are noticeably shinier after this. Also making a point of doing the sides of the frets as well as just the tops, because while the tops are the only part that really matter for playability, it goes that little extra bit towards making the instrument look like it's, been properly made with care if the entire fret is shiny and smooth. And then after I'm done with the little polishing wheels, I'm going to scrub the tops of the frets with some steel wool, and that's just going to clean off any just gunk that's left over from the polishing wheels. And it's also going to help polish the frets just that little extra bit. When I've done that, I'm going to begin applying finish. I'm not going to lacquer the entire neck, because I just don't like lacquered necks, but I am going to apply it to the face of the headstock so that it will match the finish on the rest of the body. And then I begin finishing the body. And of course, this is bringing out the color and the figuring in the wood even more than the stain already did. There, with the first few coats of finish applied, I'm going to wait for it to dry for a day or two, and then I'm going to begin gently sanding it with some 320 grit sandpaper on a sanding block to even out the surface of the finish. So with all the surface finish leveled, I'm going to hang it back up and spray a few more coats of finish. So now with that done, I'm going to start working on the nut, and by that I mean I'm going to start cutting in the slots for the strings. Now what I've done here is I mark out with pencil the location of all of the string slots, and then using the finest file, the same one that I would use for the high E string, I'm going to cut all of the slots in just initially, and that actually helps the wider files to file appropriately in the right place. And with the nut prepared, I'm just going to put in a little bit of super glue and set the nut in place. And now I'm getting ready to install the tuners, so I need to drill the holes for the screws. You can see here I've already marked out the appropriate location for all of the screws, and I just need to drill the holes. Now the neck is essentially done. I'm going to apply a single coat of oil just to bring out the color and protect the wood a little bit. And then I'm also going to oil the fretboard. I know here it looks like the fretboard became extremely dark with the oil finish, and while it did get somewhat darker, it's not quite as dark as it looks on camera. For whatever reason, the camera just wanted to make it look almost totally black. And now installing the tuners. These are some Goto locking tuners. And here I'm just going to apply some more of that shielding paint to the inside of the pickup cavities. And of course I've got a towel there just to wipe away any that might get on the surface of the guitar. That's part of the reason I wait until after I've sprayed the finish to do this, because this paint, this shielding paint, while it's still wet, does not like to stick to the finish. So if any gets out of the pickup cavities onto the surface of the body, it can just be wiped off. And here in goes the ground wire to the bridge. Just have to feed it through. And then the wires from the bridge pick up. And of course, this being a Telecaster bridge, I have to take a few of the saddles off in order to get the screws in. And now feeding in the wires for neck pickup. And also direct mounting the neck pickup to the body. But I never had any intention of using any kind of scratch plate for this guitar. I wouldn't want to cover up any of this wood that I've got for the top. And here installing the jack. Now these are the Fishman Fluence Greg Koch signature pickups. So this jack also has the recharge port for the battery that's built in. And now I'm on to wiring. First part's easy, just plugs right in. And after that, there are only a couple of wires that actually need to be soldered into place. And with all that done, the control plate just slides into place and gets screwed down. All this nice, bright, shiny chrome hardware that's an absolute magnet for fingerprints. And just a quick test to make sure it's all working. And it is. So then just putting in the ferrules for the strings. Not entirely happy with how these turned out, but they're perfectly functional. And now installing the neck. And now putting on the knobs. And now one of the last things that I do, putting on the strap locks. Now we're just about done. One of the last things left to do after I've got all the strings on is to go and make sure all of the string slots in the nut are filed to the appropriate depth. Now, I determine the appropriate depth mostly by feel. You don't want the strings to be very high off of the first fret. It should be fairly easy to push them down to the first fret. And there should also still be a slight space between the string and the first fret if you're holding the string down at the third fret. So those are the two things I check for. See right here. And then once I'm done with each string, I move on to the next. Just loosen the string, file the slot, put the string back, rinse and repeat until it's done. But that is going to be the end of part 3 of this Telecaster type guitar build. So thank you everybody for watching. The guitar is basically done at this point. And if you're still interested, stick around until the next video. There's not a part 4, but there will be a full build and demo coming up soon.